Welcome to Colorado School of Mines. I'm Walter Copan, the current Vice President for Research and Technology Transfer at the university. This year, 2024, marks a significant milestone for Mines, our 150th anniversary. Since its founding in 1874, Mines has truly been a beacon of innovation and excellence, from advancement in mining and metallurgy to leading-edge research in energy, environmental technologies, materials engineering, space resources, quantum engineering, and so much more. Mines research has grown, risen in stature, and is now recognized as a Carnegie R1 institution in the top 4% of research universities nationwide. Mines crossed the threshold of $100 million in research funding last year, and Mines continues to be respected as a global leader in addressing the world's most pressing scientific and engineering challenges. Today we have a unique opportunity. I'm joined with the three former vice presidents for research and technology transfer at Colorado School of Mines. Each one has played pivotal roles in advancing Mines' research capacity, broadening our research portfolio, enhancing our partnerships, and building our reputation for research excellence. Under their leadership, Mines has developed key programs and forged high-level partnerships that have helped to position Mines as a premier research university worldwide. John Pote was Mines' first research and technology transfer vice president. He served in the role for nearly a decade and was instrumental in enhancing the university's research profile, and he initiated our technology transfer program. He was succeeded by Tony Dean, who served 2 years as VP RTT and navigated significant transitions for the university, including changes in university leadership, and he oversaw the expansion of key external partnerships. Stefanie Tompkins joined Mines then for a 3-year tenure focusing on highlighting Mines' strengths in solving real-world problems. She fostered industry, government, and national lab collaborations. She strengthened our research community, especially throughout the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. And she took important steps to expand Mines' research international partnerships. Our discussion today will touch on how research at Mines has grown and how it's evolved over the years. We'll talk about the value of embracing change and implementing new approaches, as well as the importance of cultivating strong research partnerships and building a robust research community. So let's begin. So John Pote, I'd like to start with you. Without your work to establish a formalized Office of Research and Tech Transfer at Colorado School of Mines, none of us would be here today. Can you tell us about how the RTT office came about, how its initial goals have helped to lay the groundwork for RTT at Mines today?
Well, thanks a lot, Walter. Let me first say, being the first vice president at the Colorado School of Mines was a great privilege. And the decade you mentioned really was a lot of fun. But I came to Mines in 2006. John Trefney hired me, and I guess the goal of the board was to enhance research and tech transfer at the School of Mines. That was the time when a lot of universities were setting up the research offices. The CU VP had just been appointed. So I came on board in January 2006. I really had a great and enjoyable time getting to know the faculty and trying to analyze the school and where we were going. My initial findings were that the faculty were just outstanding. And we had a research profile which was well positioned in that we had quite a few research centers. And I'm not going to name them and go into them, because if I do, it'll offend the guys I leave out.
Indeed.
But some of those centers were really outstanding. However, they were industrial driven, essentially. And that means that the profile is not so long. We did not have for the research game, we did not have the far-reaching federal funding from Washington. So the goal of the office was to work with the faculty and identify the areas where we could play in the major leagues. And that involved identifying the faculty, working with them. That was just great. I enjoyed that. And so we had our first big win in, it was 2008. That was the National Science Foundation Big Material Science Award for Materials Energy. Then in 2011, we had the Engineering Research Center. That's a very big center from the NSF for the Water Initiative. That was with Berkeley and Stanford and New Mexico. And then finally, of course, in I think 2012, we won the DOE hub for the Critical Materials Institute. We were the lead university, and that was with Ames, Iowa. So look, in many ways that put us on the national research map. But to my mind, the very important thing where it was an existence proof to the faculty that we could play in the major leagues and win. Of course, and that was the research agenda. There was so much other stuff going on. In 2008, we hired the tech transfer director. That was Will Vaughan. And the goal there was clearly to enhance our commercial presence. And so getting that office up and running was a lot of work, understanding the research profiles, the commercial agenda, and took a lot of time, but look, it's come to fruition now. If you go to the website, there are 80 available technologies with their patents. We've got the McNeil Center, so all that worked out in really quite a great fashion. The other things we did were we hired the first lobbyists. I spent a lot of time in Washington playing the Washington game. Again, that was sort of fun, mentioning people. With Bill Scoggins, we went to see the director of the NSF, Arden Bement, who was a Mines alum. Yeah. So that was good. So getting the research office up. And another important agenda was getting the research magazine going. And that was enable us to identify key areas on campus. And lots of other activities occurred at that time, which you were asking how things evolved. For example, around 2010, Bill Scoggins was really interested in a public policy institute along the lines of the Baker Institute at Rice University. And so we started talking about that. And that came to fruition in 2015 with the Payne family giving money to form the institute. So I guess a lot of activities like that. I could go on for a long time. And I have not mentioned the important key players who guided us through there. I mentioned Will in the office, but I should say Lisa Kinsell joined me the same year in 2006. And the team was really small in the research office. It was really dedicated, and you're asking about philosophies and cultures. As you know, I came from Bell Labs. My boss at Bell Labs was Arno Penzias, who got the Nobel Prize for the Big Bang. And Arno's message to his department heads was physics for fun and profit. And my message for the office was research for fun and profit. And I think that the team did have fun. And it's great to see how things have progressed, Walt. It really has been great.
Thank you so much for those insights, John, and what a phenomenal foundation was laid during those years. And in particular now, as we look at the journey from research to innovation and impact for society and for the world. Our research portfolio is now approximately 80% federally funded, a little bit less than 20% funded from the corporate sector. And science philanthropy as well has become so much a part of the research portfolio support at Mines. Now I'd like to turn to Tony Dean. And as we celebrate Mines' 150th anniversary, we're reflecting a lot on our past, where we started. With Mines Research, we have continually looking to grow the scale and the reach of our research. And Tony, I'd just like to ask you about the connectedness between the areas that you were building as VP RTT and where we are today.
Well, certainly. Well, I had the advantage of following John, and John had laid out things, and it's really a good thing he did, because when I made the switch from Dean of a College of Applied Science and Engineering over there, I was burning a candle at both ends, because I still had graduate students in the loop, okay? And so thank God that there was a well-oiled machine already out there. But the interesting thing about that, what I'd like to talk about in terms of how things evolve with time, John, you mentioned the idea of, for example, the long time it took in the gestation period for the Pain Institute, for example. One of the things that I was most proud of in the time as both dean and then the transition was the glorious Coors Tech Center, okay? And interestingly enough, it actually had its birth just about the time I came here, okay? I came mainly because of not only a fabulous faculty here into the chemical engineering department, but in particular because Bob Key was in mechanical engineering, and we had worked occasionally in the past. Bob, just as I was coming, Stefanie, do you get a kick out of this? We had a DARPA grant, okay, for so-called Palm Power, okay? It was a 20-watt fuel cell running on diesel fuel on a soldier's belt. And that introduced us to the world of solid oxide fuel cells. Solid oxide fuel cells, initially we were doing modeling, okay? And we needed an experiment. So lo and behold, with a lot of work from a lot of people, including initially important insights from Grover Coors, okay? Because when you look at solid oxide fuel cells, the heart and the soul of it is ceramics, okay? And so in this particular context, it's a perfect example of a kind of a fundamental industrial combination, but looking at things in a very fundamental way, okay? The Colorado fuel cell was a great success, okay? And what's particularly interesting in that context, it brought together kinetics, transport, and materials, okay? Just about this time, the physics department, okay, desperately needs a new building, okay? The idea is that as we move into a new building, we really wanted to focus on multidisciplinary things. So from the beginning of the design of that building, it was to make this an integrated component that involved many of the departments on campus. And lo and behold, with a very generous donation from the Coors Tech, that building's a reality, and ironically, it's great to be back on campus now, because after this, for the first time, I'm going to get to see that building as it's been completed. Okay, well, it was only beginning. That was one of the regrets of leaving when I did. But I bring it up in the context that there have always been extremely good faculty at this institution, and they've always wanted to look beyond their own departments. Okay, and one of the things I think the research the whole research office is able to do in that context is to facilitate, okay, anything that could be done, okay, to effectively emphasize those things. And I think the Coors Tech Center is one of the explicit manifestations of that. Another thing that happened that started under John, and we worked very hard not only to continue, but to really advance, were even closer connections with the National Renewable Energy Lab down the street, okay? And one of the reasons that we were able to do that, I think that was mutually beneficial, is making it much easier, for example, to have joint appointments with faculty from Mines at NREL and NREL faculty, NREL researchers here as part of our faculty. And those two things, I think, are kind of illustrative of the nature of how kind of naturally multidisciplinary research has evolved at Mines, and how the research office has actually been very helpful in terms of stimulating that. And as John alluded to, one of the fruits of that multidisciplinary research is the ability to get the type of external credibility that major research grants were able to come into the institution.
Thank you so much. And as we think about the culture of the university and the relationship between our legacy focus areas, we think of earth, energy, and environment, and the multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary work that is underway today, I'd like to hear from all of you how that transition is being manifest. And let me start with Stefanie.
Well, sure. Let me just say that I'll just talk about one maybe clear thread that I can pull, but this is one of many, many different threads that go back to that legacy capability. But you know, when I think about material science and the importance of that everywhere in the Defense Department and in a lot of the broader national and global science and technology ecosystem, you look at what Mines does and you realize that so many of the things that it's strong in kind of can be traced back to that initial foundation in metallurgy and materials, and also understanding where those materials originally come from, right? And that integrated viewpoint, I think, has lent kind of a philosophy of how to tackle problems that you actually see across all of these other new burgeoning areas as well. So it's something that even here in DC, you know, very far away from maybe Mines' core focus of earth, energy, environment, since I live in the world of defense, whenever I see something coming from Mines, I see those really strong echoes of what makes the university so truly extraordinary and unique.
Thank you, Stefanie. So Tony, I'd like to turn to you next and ask your thoughts on the interdisciplinary relationships that we have at Mines, going back to the very beginning, but what we're seeing emerging today.
Well, let's pick one example that we talked about earlier with respect to the importance of a Colorado Fuel Cell Center. What I think is really important to emphasize now, if we look at just what's happened within the last 6 months, significant funding has come into that. And what's most interesting now is this whole idea of initially working with solid oxide fuel cells as a way to generate power. The fundamental understanding that's been developed by those researchers has now allowed the switch, so to speak, to be completely flipped. And now we effectively look at this particular system in terms of electrolysis, okay? And coming up right now, if one of the magic words out there, so to speak, is renewable hydrogen, okay? The critical thing with respect...
Green hydrogen.
Pardon?
Green hydrogen.
Green hydrogen, exactly.
Not golden hydrogen, green
right, and
hydrogen.
it's also turquoise. All right. But the interesting thing about renewable hydrogen in this particular business is a critical component is the efficiency of the electrolyzers that are used in the system. And those efficiencies can come in the boring, incremental type ways, but more fundamentally, they're going to come by developing at the molecular level the understanding of exactly what's affecting the conduction in those types of systems. And some of the best experts in the world are actually located right here at Mines. And again, following John's point, I could think of 3 or 4 of them, and then that would mean I'd forget 1 or 2. So discretion is the better part of valor in that particular context. But it's an illustration of effectively the real advantage about so much of the work that goes on in Mines is trying to look at things in the most fundamental ways. And the beauty of looking at things in fundamental ways is the opportunities for expansion into completely unanticipated areas. You've inadvertently, if you will, developed the foundation for that. And I think the current work with respect to trying to improve electrolyzers is one specific example of that. And again, in that context, it's one of the most multidisciplinary things one can imagine. You've got to worry in a hot system, kind of chemistry going on. You've always got to worry about the transport through the membranes in the systems. And perhaps most importantly, is something that Stefanie had alluded to, is understanding the fundamental material science in those types of systems is absolutely critical for those advances.
Yeah. John, over to you. What are your thoughts on the evolution of the transdisciplinary nature of mines?
Well, following on from what Stefanie and Tony said, we just have an uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time. And I'm not sure whether it's due to our background or whatever is going on, but just take a few examples. I mean, for the extractive industries now, geothermal is right on the front page. And we're right in the middle of that. And can you think of a more important area now than the critical minerals for the whole future economy? That is mining, the future of mining, the environmental game, that's water. And we're right in the middle of that again. So we just have this uncanny ability to play in the right areas. I mean, the history there. If you look at Rocky Flats, which was the manufacturer of the pits for plutonium, we played a significant role when it was in operation, understanding the metallurgy. And when the place was dissolved, we played a significant role in cleaning up, the environmental cleanup. So I'm just amazed how this whole place works. It's a great success story.
It is indeed. And as we look at the pragmatic approach of research. Tony, you talk about looking at the fundamentals, but it's also the use-inspired aspects of the research.
Oh, absolutely.
The connections with industry, the partnerships with the federal laboratory sector, and with global partnerships as well. And so I think we have so much to be proud of as an institution that's driving innovation with impact.
Oh, I agree. I mean, Stefanie should talk to that point. But as you know, I was and still am close to the weapons labs. Los Alamos, Livermore, and Sandia. These are very important institutions. And the School of Mines is really on the radar screen of those institutions and has always been so.
Yeah.
So, and Tony mentioned NREL. I mean, that is a great relationship.
Tony, you also oversaw some major transitions while you were VPRTT here at Mines. And that involved the transition between Presidents Bill Scoggins and Paul Johnson. Tell us about the journey that you were involved in there and how that affected research and tech transfer at Mines.
Right. Well, one of the good thing to begin with, I think, is there was not a discontinuity in any way as a result of the transition. The trends that we had started continued. We've alluded to one of them already, and that is the whole Coors Tech building. Another one that happened during that time that turned out to be a win-win situation is if we're going to have a Coors Tech building, it means we've got to take down the physics building. Okay, if we're going to take down the physics building, we got a lot of anxious physics faculty out there that want a place. So this led to effectively, John had been instrumental in terms of the original GRL, okay, and this allowed to the building of the annex. And that turned out to be enormously important because, among other things, it allowed a temporary home for physics during the time of the construction. But more importantly then, as a result of the physics move back into Coors Tech, it substantially enhanced the amount of really quality research facilities on campus, which was invaluable in terms of moving forward. And if I can digress for just a minute, and John had made the point earlier about critical materials and their impact. Another area where Mines actually had a very important initiating role, and I think they can be very, very proud of that,
is an area that we're all incredibly concerned with these days, and that's methane emissions, okay?
Right.
This is, in my mind, the classic low-lying fruit with respect to climate change, all right? Because if you can find it, you can plug it. It's that simple. And so MINES was instrumental in one of the very earliest ways of doing experimental investigations of trying to properly interpret ground level measurements of methane with airborne measurements of methane. And I bring that up because that then started an incredible chain of events which has now led to this marvelous facility up the road at Colorado State, okay, of a way to effectively test all of these new type of methane emission devices. And the reason I bring it up is this is an area where there's already been enormous real-world impact. The petroleum companies, the majors in particular, have in the last couple years been able to dramatically drop their methane emissions, okay, which is by far and away the best short-term solution to try to minimize climate change. And a lot of that can be going back to this, in the last decade, the remarkable advance, and now we have satellites, okay, that are effectively measuring this. And again, the beauty of it is nothing can be simpler. You've got a big emitter, all you have to do is fix a valve. It's that simple, but you've got to be able to find it. Yeah. And MINES was instrumental in starting that particular area.
Yeah. Great, thank you so much, Tony. And as we see, MINES is continually evolving. We're expanding to meet industry and societal needs. We have launched a new website for Colorado School of Mines that highlights the pillars of research and innovation that help us communicate even more effectively the breadth of our research and our innovation portfolio. We have also been tying together these interdisciplinary programs with the outreach opportunities for the university as we look at the importance of societal engagement, and so many of the programs that Stefanie was involved in, including our initiatives in Latin America, have truly brought tremendous opportunities, new funding, relationships, and tremendous opportunities for research and for student experience as well. So I'd like to open up the question to our three distinguished panelists. How do you think transitions and change helps MINES retain our strengths and add new capabilities and new partnerships? Stefanie, let me start with you.
Oh, sure. So, yeah, I mean, as the university research capability continues to grow and the perspective really broadens, it feels like, you know, a little bit like what we were talking about before. It just plays back to those core values, that core research philosophy, and those really core kind of originating technical strengths that MINES has had. So you go back to the basics, not just of you know, sort of metallurgy and mining and materials, but you also go back to that fundamental philosophy about trying to do the right thing to advance society and industry. And as long as you have that kind of embedded in what you're doing, then these transitions into new and broader capabilities seem to sort of effortlessly bring the past and the present and the future, you know, kind of into a cycle that's been really fun to watch.
Yeah.
Great. John?
Oh, Steffi has articulated it beautifully. I'll just make the point that to handle the change and grow, it really depends on hiring outstanding faculty. Yeah. It's the faculty who drive this. I mean, in the administration, hopefully you can provide an environment where life at MINES is enjoyable and fun, but you've got to hire the best and the brightest, and they will take you in these new avenues. That's the comment I would like to make.
Thanks, John. Tony?
Well, one area I'd like to bring up where I think there's been a significant appropriate expansion of research activities is bio. Okay, that if you go back to when John came here, we effectively had one research group on campus kind of doing bio stuff, doing very nice stuff related to water. And in fact, one of the interesting things in GRL is the fact that on one of the upper floors up there, okay, there was the DNA structure on the floor. And it was unique on campus, if you will, in that context.
Yeah.
But then it turned out that probably about 2010, and as you get old, those memories kind of fade away. But in that ballpark, for example, we started bringing in, for example, in chemical engineering, we brought in a couple of really aggressive, very, very good people in bio. And they were, and I am going to bring one name up here because it's important. One of the people I think that was instrumental in doing that was David Marr.
Yep.
Okay, David effectively was very effective at developing a research program that had a gee whiz component to it, okay, which was terrific.
Microfluidics.
Exactly, microfluidics had all kinds of practical applications, and he was able then, for example, to bring in a young faculty member, Keith Neves, okay, who, and that led to more and more faculty members coming into different areas until what now effectively this is a research area which is no longer an infant, okay? It's well grown and developing, and I think that's one area that has really made mines much more attractive to the student body in general, because it really no longer is it effectively an ore digger in the best sense of the word. That you can in fact be a very talented ore digger, but you can also be, you've opened up an entire new spectrum. Another area, for example, is robotics, okay? And particularly the impact of robotics with respect to trying to assist various types of human motion, okay, and things like that. The whole idea of effectively going into adaptive materials, okay? Again, taking materials have been around forever, but here's an opportunity to literally bring it to the next generation.
Stefanie, one of the most significant areas of focus when you were VP RTT at Mines was the push toward greater external recognition of what Mines insiders have long known, that we are a top choice partner solving real world problems. Much of our research, as we've been discussing, is use inspired, and our connections to industry, the federal labs, other universities, decision makers in Washington, D.C., all inform and drive our research endeavors. Can you give us some insight on your own efforts to bring this message to a broader audience while you were VP RTT?
Sure. It's something I really took great pleasure in being able to do. I think, when you talk about bringing a message forward, there's two different things you can think about. One is, talking the talk, and the other is walking the walk. And we really wanted to concentrate on the latter part initially. So I spent a lot of time talking to faculty and asking what the barriers were for them to be able to take on these much bigger projects, which is effectively the best way to communicate what Mines is, capable of doing. And we spent a lot of time concentrating on breaking down those barriers. So it was, it was simple things like hiring somebody full-time to do nothing but help with complex multi-institution, multidisciplinary proposals. Because, for those of, people who don't do this for a living, you're trying to write a massively complex funding proposal, talking about, hard science and how you're going to do it. At the same time that you're teaching classes, you're doing your own research, you're keeping track of gazillions of other things, and you're writing this proposal often in partnership with maybe a half dozen or more people from different departments or even different universities, right? So the sheer kind of overwhelming nature of trying to do that brings a lot of universities back in and kind of holds a lot of them back. I look across the hundreds of universities that I work with today, consistently that ability to bring the people together and write proposals is a huge barrier. So we hired someone full-time to do nothing but concentrate on that. And that young woman, I think she earned her salary, like in the first quarter that she was here, she earned her salary back over like 10 or 20 times in terms of funding that was won by the university. We spent a lot of time talking to Congress. It turns out that there are some really interesting rules in places like the Department of Energy that sort of demand that universities provide cost share for federal funding that they win. And it effectively penalized mines maybe more than almost any university in the country, because our faculty were so good at getting funding from the Department of Energy that at some point, you feel like you've already given up your first and second born child. What else is there to offer in terms of cost share? So we had to work with Congress, and we said, this is fundamentally going against what the United States wants, right? You're actually discouraging people from trying to do their best work because they can't afford to. And that seemed, like a fatal flaw in the system. So we were able to get Colorado's delegation to work together to actually suspend that requirement for universities and for nonprofit institute organizations. So there was a lot of this kind of behind the scenes, not terribly sexy stuff that had to get done, that every one of those things were sort of what was holding the university back. And I just wanted to unleash the power of this amazing place and these amazing faculty members. And then, a nice way that kind of played out in an obvious reward was the one that you mentioned, Walt, when you were talking about Peru and our work with Arequipa. And this was sort of funny. It started off with a random email from the vice president for research at this university called UNSA down in Arequipa. And it was so unbelievable. It was effectively saying, we have lots and lots of money and we want to fund you to help us. That, the inclination was to think it was a hoax. And it actually took a message from from Purdue University, who was already working with that university, to call me and say, please take them seriously. This is not like, some kind of an internet scam. It's real. But then, what they were offering and what they were looking for help was so big and so complex that I think it was really lucky that we had, put a lot of those other things in place first, because then we knew that we could respond. We knew we could bring together faculty members from all across the university. We could all fly down in a group to Peru and sort things through quickly and come back and write effective proposals and get that funding, and then even more importantly, to actually execute on it and to do our jobs in order to have the outcome that we wanted. So it was a lot of this sort of bottoms up, which then allows the university to take on much bigger and bolder initiatives, that some of which might be top down or coming from unexpected external partners.
Stefanie, what a wonderful story. And as we look at the relationships across Latin America today, that started from that single outreach to you to look at developing a joint opportunity for research, for education, to elevate the stature of the Peruvian university. It's now a network that extends to over 6 universities in Peru. There are relationships that we've expanded in Chile, in Ecuador, in Bolivia, and in Brazil, all from that single outreach. And it's wonderful to see these interdisciplinary relationships focus on science and engineering that makes a difference. And today, as we look at these types of partnerships, we also see the importance of working with communities to solve the types of problems that they see as their highest priority. And again, it drives our message of research and tech transfer at Mines, seeking innovation with impact. In addition to our very strong ties to industry and other collaborators, we are dramatically growing our entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem at the university, together with ever stronger partnerships with government entities. It's been great to have a number of us with strong ties across the federal sector and with important leadership roles in science and technology for our nation. I'm curious now for your thoughts on how building a cohesive research community enables advancement and how we cultivate the idea of innovation with impact at Colorado School of Mines. John, let me start with you. When you think about your days at Bell Labs and then what you were able to translate then to this environment and seeing what we're building today, what are your thoughts on this journey to innovation?
Well, you did mention Bell Labs, and I'll briefly say there, I was at Murray Hill, and that facility was designed to have 2,000 scientists and engineers in one building connected to the central library and cafeteria. And so you had to bump into scientists all the time getting in and out. And I bring that up because I think the small mines physical campus is important for our cohesiveness and working together. But I think most importantly, it's the culture of the place. Mines is really a very collegial university, and as universities go. And I think that's probably, I would say, the most important thing, all the way from the administration to the departments. The feeling on campus is really very good. And to my mind, that drives a lot of what you were asking.
Indeed. Tony, what are your perspectives on the drive to innovation impact?
Well, it's interesting because if you go back to the beginning, all right, when this 30 years ago, the school in a limited area, it was extraordinarily interested in societal impact.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean that was and even earlier on, you're now at 20% industrial funding. It was more like 50%. Well, at some level, that's not a detriment. Okay,
right. Yeah.
And the thing is I think most of us, when we think of scientists and researchers, okay, we want to really do two things. Okay, we want to understand things in a better way, but more importantly, the reason we do it is because we want it to make an impact. I mean, you're in a position to do things, and I think that's why we're finding the growth of entrepreneurial things now in some levels is just the kind of a natural outgrowth of that attitude all along to be in a position to improve society in one way, shape, or form. And the nice thing about it now is that there are many more structures in place to effectively smooth that type of transition through the ultimate valley of death and what have you.
Yeah.
But so I think in a sense, it's a part of the culture. John referred to culture, and he's absolutely right. Part of a culture, I think, in this business is that you basically want to be in a position to improve society. And effectively what's happened now is there are more and more mechanisms whereby there is an opportunity to do that entire transition. And essentially, I think that's one of the critical roles of your office right now is to have the luxury, in a sense, of being in a position where it's becoming a well-oiled machine. Yeah. and you really, and it gets exactly back to a point John made, is that what better way to attract young faculty members and to see there can come to a place that in fact they are in a position to favorably impact society, and it's an absolute win-win situation.
Yeah, indeed.
Excellent.
And Stefanie, while you were VPRTT here, the journey of Mines to build an innovation infrastructure and an innovation culture were really ramping up. And so I'd appreciate your perspectives as well on the culture of Mines and our drive for innovation impact.
I think and both John and Tony have said most of what's to be said, right? This cohesive collection of sort of capability together, and this passion for actually having an impact and having all the pieces in place, I think are the most important messages. So the conversations we were having as this greater emphasis on innovation and entrepreneurship was growing were really about that. It was maybe an echo of what I was seeing just inside the RTT office of like, what are the barriers? Like, what is it that stops this amazing Mines invention from actually doing good for society as quickly as possible, right? I mean, we could all sit back and say, you know what, it'll get there eventually. Publish a couple of papers and maybe 10, 20 years from now, we'll see it doing some benefit. But we live in a world where things are moving really quickly. The problems are much more complex. Research is coming from all directions and it can be very chaotic. And this ability to know that you have some control over moving something forward, and seeing benefits from it in your lifetime, not just in your lifetime, but maybe, before you graduate your next student, that sort of thing starts to feel much more important and much more urgent. And I think that watching that happen, it's not just that Mines is now doing that internally, but it's that the rest of the world has been moving at a different pace. And so the boundary conditions between the Mines ecosystem and the broader science and technology ecosystem are much better matched. And I think that's going to pay off in extraordinary dividends. Yeah.
Thank you for those perspectives, Stefanie. I'd now like to ask each of you, as we're coming toward the close of our time together, what message would you like to leave to our Mines community at 150 years? John?
A message for the Mines community. For the 150th anniversary, I think the message is the School of Mines is just a unique institution, not only in America, but nationally, internationally. And I think the message for the faculty and the alums is we have to grow the school and keep it on the track it's been on. It's got a great history, and it will have a great future.
Thank you. Tony?
Well, building on John's point, success begets success, all right? And one of the things that I think is going to be critical for the future, and I'm personally very optimistic about, is the growth of not only the research tradition within the university, but the education tradition within the university are such that it's going to become increasingly attractive, okay? And that I kind of think, quite frankly, the sky's the limit in that particular context. I think there's enormous opportunities. One just kind of illustration of that, I'm now living in a suburb of DC in a kind of continuing care community. It turns out there's a fellow in the community who always wears a hat with an M, but his M is from Michigan. But his granddaughter goes to Mines, and she just finished her freshman year, and she is ecstatic about the school. And now I tease this fellow by saying, now you have another reason for wearing an M.
Thank you, Tony.
That's great.
Stefanie, your thoughts for our 150th anniversary?
I think what I would ask people to do is remember and believe that Mines really is, as John said, it's unique and it's extraordinary, and I think it is what the university of the future has to be.
Yep.
So if there's anything I ever worry about, it is that as Mines starts to cross more and more of these sort of traditional metrics, becoming an R1 institution and becoming more and more recognized, that everybody remembers that you don't want to actually be like everybody else. They should want to be like you. And I just hang on to that. As you're measuring yourself, and set your own goals, and remember to do what's important, at the heart of what it is, right? And don't focus too much on how well you're measuring up to others, because really, as I just said, they need to be measuring up to you.
Thank you, Stefanie. Thank you all. What a remarkable conversation we've been able to have today, and I look forward to continuing. Mines today is indeed a very special institution, a unique culture, combining strategic research with technology transfer, entrepreneurship, innovation, societal impact. We have certainly elevated our engagement in policy and government relations. We've strengthened partners across the federal laboratory network and working with research institutions across the US and globally. We've enjoyed what we call the Colorado Energy Research Collaboratory, which uniquely brings Mines together with University of Colorado Boulder, with Colorado State University, and our close neighbor and research partner, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And that unique spirit of collaboration, the joy of working together. Tony, you mentioned the methane emissions work, and the collaboration between our two institutions has been truly remarkable. Our culture of use-inspired research is continuing and is strong indeed. And I mentioned at the outset our work with the philanthropic support for science and technology at Mines is certainly on the rise as science philanthropy itself is becoming a much more important part of support for the research enterprise in the United States and around the world. We've also brought a very high level of focus on research integrity and research security to Mines. That's been one of the very important growth areas as we're working increasingly in topics where we have either controlled unclassified information and export control materials. It's been an important aspect also that our university attracts so many close, trusted partnerships. That is an area that we continue to build upon. Mines is now, in addition to many other groups represented in the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, our Council on the Government, University, and Industry Research Roundtable, the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, working with leading think tanks in the U.S. with international reach, with prestigious professional organizations, and many other thought leadership roles. I'd just like to thank each of you for being part of this progress for Colorado School of Mines, a unique university in the world, a sought-after partner globally, and the Mines community is grateful to each one of you for your commitment, for your contributions, and for the unique aspects in which each of you have fostered innovation, research, and technology transfer at Colorado School of Mines. Thank you also for your perspectives as we think about this unique moment for our 150th anniversary. We are looking forward to what comes next from our research expertise, continually bringing the very best talent in the world to Colorado School of Mines, our work in policy leadership, in our collaborations, technology innovations, the investment opportunities that we're driving, the Beck Venture Center, the Labriola Innovation Hub, our Innovation Entrepreneurship Program, all interlinked. Mines will continue to deliver the innovations that society needs to prosper on Earth and beyond.